Always a pleasure to be here. Professor, thank you.
So we see now that the Europeans have argued that the way to defeat Russia is to go after its energy. Now, initially, this was some sanctions on the Russian energy companies. Then they moved on to cutting themselves off from Russian imports. Then they discussed the need to bring the war to Russia. Then we saw attacks on the Russian energy infrastructure on Russian territory. Then we saw more attacks recently on Russian civilian vessels, that is, its oil tankers and all in the Black Sea. And now we got the news in that there's also been attack on a Russian oil tanker in the Mediterranean, which is pretty far away from Ukraine, and there's reports that the drones were launched from Greece. Now, Putin is saying that he will retaliate for this against the Ukrainians, and well, I don't doubt that he will retaliate against the Ukrainians, but at the same time, with the European financing, intelligence, war planning, weapons, well, not just Europe, it's all the NATO countries, including the United States. Is this a Europe-NATO attack on Russia? And do you think, as we now go further up the escalation ladder, do you think this could, lead to more direct confrontation between the Russians and NATO?
Listen, I think we have to just acknowledge that there are those in the Western alliance and in the Western world writ large that want a conflict with Russia. I mean, it sounds absurd to say it on the face value because all the words coming out of their mouths are always a just and lasting peace, etc. But they want a just and lasting peace according to their terms and their definitions from a position of inferiority and weakness, imposing it upon the side that has the military power, the economic power, etc., all those things that are irrational. And so when you say, with one hand, we're trying to find a negotiated settlement and a just and lasting peace, they only want it just from the perspective of their side. So there's not even the contemplation, not even the consideration of a mutually just and fair peace. And that really is as telling as it can be, because if you only want something from your side and you're not even willing to contemplate the other side, that continues this long, decades-long process that we've been going through in the West, where we never give any possibility of credibility to Russia even having a view, even having a possibility of any kind of a security environment. I think you actually talked about that the last time you were on my show, and I thought it was a great analogy that the security competition is something that every country needs to engage in because they have their own national security requirements. And if you say, okay, your side doesn't have any valid security requirements, only our side does, and then you take action based on that, then you are setting up a situation where conflict is almost the only outcome. We've been doing that since the beginning. I actually was having an engagement with a colleague earlier today, and I went back to look at some of the things I had written prior to the war starting in February 2022, and some things I had written throughout 2021 warning that war was coming if we ignored the Russian side of all this. We did, and then we had the war we did. And then, of course, you track the next 4 years, and you see that we continue to ignore the Russian side, and we continue to hold out only for a calculation and an end to the war on our terms alone, ignoring Russia, and it keeps getting worse for our side. Now that I think that here where if we're not in, we're very close to the Ukrainian death throes in terms of their military capacity, their capacity as a state to wage war, to support war, and to conduct war. I think it's nearing the point to where it's just going to be completely exhausted. And instead of acknowledging that and saying, you know, man, as much as I hate this, we have to acknowledge reality and let's take appropriate, reasonable actions to limit the further damage. Instead of doing that, we're still where we were in 2021. Ignoring the Russian side and taking actions that we want on our side, and we don't want any consequences. We don't want there to be any reaction. And so since Russia has been, if we just being blunt about this, they have been very reticent to react to a lot of things. A lot of things either we claimed were Russian red lines or even Russia claimed were something close to red lines, and we haven't seen a strong reaction from Russia on a number of things outside of the confines of the Ukrainian theater of war. there's this view that there never will be, so that we are free to do anything that we want to Russia, and there won't be a response, whether it's these long-range strikes into their oil infrastructure, this, this so-called spider web operation that happened earlier this summer, deep inside of Russia, and they were like, okay, nothing happened to that, so let's just try another one. And I think now that actually hitting these civilian vessels, which in almost in any other time is going to be seen as an act of piracy or an act of war, and yet we don't seem to be bothered by it. We're just continuing to go down this path, and now that we're basically taunting Putin to actually do something about it. And according to what you said, you saw in the news that he's vowing revenge. I suspect that probably Putin is going to remain not going to take the bait, because I think there are those in the West who want this to expand. And so they're trying to prompt Russia to do something outside of Ukraine so that then they can go, aha, I told you, Article 5, here we go. Now then we're going to bring this into the war. I think there are those who just absurdly, irrationally, and dangerously want that. And I think they're trying to prompt Putin to do that. What I think is he'll probably do is strike even harder in Odessa. I think that you may see a move against them. I think you're going to see more shots on their infrastructure and a tit for tat. You hit our shipping, we're going to hit your shipping. And the Russians have a lot more capacity to do that. So we'll see how he ends up doing it. But he's not going to do nothing. But I don't think he's going to take the bait in here. But this just shows, in my view, that there's just the rot, and there's no kinder way to put this, mental thinking in the West, that instead of acknowledging that this thing is just lost, you can't win this, you can't reverse this. That was shattered in 2023. So more than 2 full years ago, we lost any ability to think that maybe we could reverse the battlefield by all these inputs, whether it was sanctions, intelligence, training, of course, thousands of armored vehicles, millions of rounds of various ammunition, missiles, all that kind of stuff, utterly failed to push Russia out of anything. And in the 2 years since that time, it's been nothing but moving to the West, albeit at a slow pace, but at a significant and sustained pace, and massive casualties on the Ukraine side, which are irreplaceable. And so now then, here we are at this time when President Trump wants to have a negotiated settlement. The Russians are still open to a negotiated settlement, and the only two parties that are against this are Ukraine and Europe at large. And the question is going to remain, will Trump sit on the sidelines and just watch this play out and allow the situation to deteriorate further, or will he finally step in and say, all right, that's it. If you want to do this lunacy and insanity that could spark a war with Russia that could all too easily go nuclear, you're on your own. We're not going to join you in the stupidity. I don't know if he's going to do that or not, Glenn, but that's what probably needs to be done. Otherwise, who knows whether or not that we get this thing expanded beyond the borders of Ukraine or not.